Hi everyone, bit of a sad moment, bit of a sad video I suppose, because I just learnt that a YouTuber, Morris108, passed away a few days ago now. It was in October of 2019. You might be watching this in the future. His real name was Maurice Herman, spelled Maurice, I think, Herman. And he was a very interesting YouTuber, and really a historic one. If there's ever a book written about the history of or the development, the genesis of alternative media, there would have to be a chapter on Maurice Herman, because he played a very important role around the 2011 period. That's when I discovered him anyway, and continued through to the current day. Was making YouTube videos right up until very recently. Basically he was an anti-imperialist, and he had very interesting and unique perspectives. So going back to 2011, I found Morris's YouTube channel, might have found his Twitter account first, I think, because of what was happening to Libya. There was a terrible war launched by NATO on Libya in 2011, and Morris was very much against it. He was one of very few people that I could find online, one of the only ones who in the West who saw things like I did. I was very much in support of the Libyan government and very much against the rebel forces. And Morris, there he was in English. He was living in England at the time, where he was from, I believe. Somewhere near Islington, I'm not sure if I've pronounced that right. And he'd make these videos, and it was very incredible to find a Westerner with a bit of an English accent making these videos supporting the Libyan government and basically expressing views that I agreed with. So he was a very important part of the genesis of that alternative media resistance movement. Because if you go back to the Iraq War, when there was no Twitter, there was no YouTube, there were huge question marks in the media. It wasn't all just pro-war, pro-lies. Questions were being asked, protests were getting coverage, and the debate was present. By the time Libya came around, all of that resistance had disappeared. The media was 100% compliant. And this is why the shift into alternative media on Twitter and YouTube and so on was so important, and that will be seen as the turning point in media history around that period. And so Morris was a key player. Not a huge name, not a lot of people have heard of him. I doubt anyone watching this has heard of him. But he was a very important figure, and he would give original thoughts, insightful thoughts, interesting theories, sometimes that I didn't agree with. Sometimes he'd say things I really didn't agree with, but for every bad moment like that, there are 100 good moments. And I didn't watch his videos every day or anything, but I really appreciated his contribution. I sent him a little bit of money. Once he would do this thing, he'd always ask for donations at the end, and that's how he survived, was he just asked for a donation. I think he had a Patreon account set up eventually, and so on. And a few years ago he moved to Cambodia, and he started a new life there. Morris probably was in his 50s when he first started making YouTube videos. I dare say he was around 60, I suppose, when he passed away recently. And he'd get out and about, and I guess he had a selfie stick and a little scooter or a small motorbike, and he'd travel around around where he lived, I suppose, up just random little alleys and paths through, because a lot of the land isn't really sort of privately owned there. You can kind of just go wherever. And he'd film while he's riding along, and he'd stop and film a video or this and that, sometimes in a market, sometimes near a river, somewhat, wherever. And it was a really interesting perspective, and quite sort of kind of a relaxing way of vicariously experiencing that part of the world. Totally different to these sort of travel channels of videos you see by very hedonistic younger people who display a lot of very false exuberance just because that's what they think gets views and everything. I'm not so much into that content. With Morris, it was real. It wasn't over the top. It was just very real. And unfortunately, that content's gone because YouTube deleted his channel actually just days before he died. So, maybe there is some almost fitting. Morris had some interesting theories, and and maybe something did happen to Morris that was to do with foul play. I don't know. Apparently, it was dengue fever. He went down with and deteriorated over a few days, and eventually passed away. Morris had, I think, a wife. I'm not sure if they were married, but and children in Cambodia to a Cambodian woman. So, a difficult time for them. I sent a little bit of money to a GoFundMe account that's been set up. But yeah, just a really sad moment for me and other people who are finding out about this now. Just an original thinker. He had an interesting theory which sounded like a vast conspiracy theory, but when I puzzle over what happens in the world, I often come back to this theory of his, and that is that the powers that be and the great forces behind nation states, they're trying to basically mix all of the world's people and create a homogeneous sort of version of humanity with all the races being mixed. And he, with some human note that he was actually part of that because he'd gone to Cambodia and had children with a Cambodian woman. But he would blame that, the desire to affect that on all these, for all these wars, where you create mass movements of people, mass refugees, and when you try and work out why they're doing all these wars, it's kind of hard to make sense of it. It is like they're deliberately trying to create masses of refugees moving out of the Middle East, Africa, and so on to other places. That's exactly what's happening. And so I often, because I never really agreed with that theory when I first heard it, but it's funny how I keep going back to it as one of the only things that makes any sense as to their rationale. Because invading Iraq didn't help America's interests. They didn't need the oil. America is the biggest oil producer in the world right now. It certainly wasn't about democracy or human rights, of course, or WMDs. Anyway, so sort of speaking all over the place here, but the Libya, his contribution to the resistance, starting with Libya, was incredibly important. There was just no one talking about it, and people would go to him for news. He ended up with some contacts in Libya. You'd get updates on what was happening with the war over there. Gaddafi had won the war. The Libyan government had the war totally won, and then NATO intervened and took them. I spoke about this just a couple of videos ago. It took them 6 months. 10,000 plus airstrikes. Probably a lot of forces on the ground. They had to arm the opposition, and just they got what they wanted in the end. But at the same time, Morris basically, with others, was a part of a genesis of a completely new media. Ironically, one that spat him out by deleting his YouTube account. So all of those videos are gone. And some of the videos I've done talking about, foreign or geopolitical things, politics outside, those were inspired by videos that I'd seen Morris do, where he would record things outside, just in front of a river or something, as I'd mentioned. And it's quite a nice way to record videos sometimes, as opposed to just being inside like I am now. Sheikh Imran Hussein, Morris introduced me to him. He's an interesting cleric. I think he's based somewhere in the West Indies or around that area. Morris interviewed him a couple of times. Morris had very strong concerns about what was being done to the Arab people, the Islamic people. As we all, or not all of us, but those of us who are against the wars in the Middle East have. And he took an interest in points of Sharia law. Sharia law, overall, it's hard to support it because of the terrible aspects that are in there, but there are individual points within Sharia law that actually match, and I hadn't even heard of these aspects of Sharia law, certain things that I believe in, like low interest rates or zero interest rates. That's a tenet of Sharia law. And so you can hear, Imran Hossein, if you're interested, talk about. He sort of specialises in the financial teachings of Islam, if you like. So that was an interesting sort of avenue that I went down because of a video or a few videos by Morris. And as I say, he had a few controversial views. He was very against homosexuality. It was almost like he had a chip on his shoulder. If something might have happened to him, I don't know what. But that was a quirky aspect of him and his analysis. He was very much against the liberalisation that we're seeing in the West. And I am as well in some ways too. So he was just an original thinker, and if you can find some of his videos, he might be on BitChute or something still. I'd encourage you to go have a look. You will probably see some things that you don't like. I did, but that's okay. He was as much a philosopher as a journalist. And you got to take your hat off to someone who jumps into YouTube, probably in their 50s, I think, and makes content that people want to see. I think he'd swollen up to about 60,000 subscribers or something. I didn't watch him for a long period. I came back to his channel a while back, and I was amazed at how many subscribers he had. So he'd made a real success of it, even after the Libya conflict had, it's never really ended, but the NATO phase has come to an end. So anyway, I guess rest in peace, Morris108. If you feel like it, go maybe pull up some of his videos. You might find some crazy stuff. But in amongst it, you'll find some things I think that make you stop and think. And that's so important that that we have to get away from this nonsense. The media it's just getting worse, as I said. But I'll leave it there. So thank you for watching.